October 22nd, 2024. Let us gather together and experience the goodness of God. I'm Pastor Trey Comstock. We'll begin with our scripture of the week, Job chapter 38, verses 1 through 7, and verses 34 through 41, and a piece by Pastor Emily Larson entitled, Who Are We, Mere Mortals? Then, Pastor Emily Larson, Pastor Scott Gatchat, and I will talk scripture, and more specifically, how we navigate our ebbs and flows in our relationship with God. But first,
a reading from Job chapter 38, verses 1 through 7 and 34 through 41. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up your loins like a man. I will question you, and you shall declare to me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me, if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the heavenly beings shouted for joy? Can you lift up your voice to the clouds so that a flood of waters may cover you? Can you send forth lightning so that they may go and say to you, Here we are? Who has put wisdom in the inward parts or given understanding to the mind? Who has the wisdom to number the clouds, or who can tilt the water skins of the heavens when the dust runs into a mass and the clods cling together? Can you hunt the prey for the lion, or satisfy the appetite of the young lions when they crouch in their dens, or lie in wait in their covert? Who provides for the raven its prey when its young ones cry to God and wander about for lack of food? Previous to this passage of Scripture, Job has cried out to God, objecting to the predicaments that he has found himself in. Understandably so. Job questions the suffering that he is enduring. He's had enough, and he throws a temper tantrum to God, asking, Why me? Instead of answering Job with a justification, God answers Job with this argument, that there is so much more happening here than Job could know. This conversation between God and Job confronts Job with his own limitations in knowledge and capacity, while simultaneously contrasting them with the resourcefulness and the wisdom of God. In short, God comes back at Job with, I am God and you are not. God says, Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Are you able to make it rain? Do you control the lightning bolts? Are you able to care for all of the animals on the earth and provide them with their food? Who are we, mere mortals, to contemplate and comprehend the inner workings of an infinite and omnipotent God? God's ways are not our ways. During this discourse, God basically tells Job sardonically, Surely you must already know. The Hebrew translation for this phrase to know is yada, as in the phrase yada, yada, yada that we use today to mean glossing over the details, right? Implying that the rest of the story is already known by the listener. God tells Job yada, 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 like Job must already know about where the foundations of the earth are set and how to control lightning bolts. Obviously, Job doesn't. In Scripture, the word yada is often used to describe this limited human understanding compared to God's infinite wisdom and omniscience. While we might be tempted to skip over the complexities of life with a yada, 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 the book of Job reminds us that true yada, that intimate knowledge, requires humility and reverence for the mysteries of God's ways, which are far beyond our comprehension. This is the point that God was actually making to Job. This argument leads to a newfound humility in Job. Job, in his final response to God, says, Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. That's in Job 42:3. Job's encounter with God leads him not to an answer, but to an acceptance of his own limitations in the face of God's divine mystery. Sometimes in the Christian faith, we call this divine mystery fear of the Lord. a deep reverence and awe for God's greatness. It's this humility that then gives us a glimpse into the nature of God. As God's created beings, our posture before God should not be one of demanding explanations, but of trust and submission, knowing that God is infinitely wise and just, even when we cannot understand the ways in which God is working. Sort of like being a single thread in an intricate tapestry. Only the master weaver can comprehend the grand design that is at work. Just as that single thread appears meaningless on its own, so too can the events of our lives feel very random, unfair, or chaotic even. Yet in God's grand design, every moment, every thread has a purpose. And when we are caught in the midst of the chaos of life, we can trust that God, the master weaver, sees the whole picture and knows how every thread fits together for our good. We need only to pause and look around us to realize that God is in control. Everywhere we look, from the stars in the heavens to the cells in our bodies, we encounter complexity and order that just baffles the human mind. Even with all of our advancements in science and technology and all of our understanding, we still just scratch the surface of understanding God's creation. If creation itself is this intricate, how much more mysterious and unfathomable is our Creator? I had a friend describe it to me with this analogy once. When we try to contemplate the mysteries of God, think of God as a Rubik's Cube, and think of yourself as just a two-dimensional stick figure. We are not capable of imagining or comprehending beyond our 2 dimensions when we're a flat figure. So if we see a Rubik's Cube from one side, we simply see, yellow square or blue square or white square, etc. When in actuality, there are so many more dimensions to God. We can't comprehend the 3D nature of a Rubik's Cube while we are still thinking in 2 dimensions. Just like we can't begin to fathom the depths and facets of God's nature as we are still finite creatures. In the end, when it comes down to it, we just can't fit God in a box of our own making. God is, for us, truly unfathomable. So, as you just heard in the piece, Job comes to God, they have this conversation, and God gives the best non-answer I think I have ever heard from anybody in the history of all time. God comes back to Job's temper tantrum and says, I am God and you are not. Right?
And that's the whole answer.
That's the argument.
I love this. This is one of the rare times where I have written nothing. I wrote this series, but I was off on Sunday, and so Anthony preached, and Emily wrote the piece, and obviously Scott, you preached for your church, and so. But this is one of my. I looked at, so I'm on next week for Mark chapter 10, which I also like. But this is one of my favorite scriptures. I absolutely love the argument between God and Job, because it runs so counter to how we talk about Job. I love the you hear this in hospitals. Oh, I'm trying to have the faith of Job. So you're yelling at God? Go for it.
Or the patience of Job, or the whatever.
Job.
Right, the patience of Job. But Job throws a temper tantrum.
Job throws a temper tantrum.
Yeah.
And again, God doesn't zap him. God doesn't hate Job. God does not condemn Job. God gives Job a glorious non-answer. But he doesn't, he doesn't walk away from this destroyed. He just walks away from this having got his answer from God, and you can take it or you can leave it. And this is and this is also, by the way, one of our oldest biblical texts. It's this or the Song of the Sea, the Miriam's song about Shir Hashem. Anyways, the celebration of the drowning of Pharaoh. That's probably the oldest, but this is up there, right? This is ancient stuff. This is older. I understand this comes after the creation story in the plot, but this was written down before the creation story. This is ancient.
Yes.
And one of our first biblical texts is about the question of suffering. And the answer is essentially God is mysterious.
Right. God's
Yeah.
ways are not our ways. You do not understand because you were not there when the foundations of the earth were laid.
Right. Do you know where we hide the lightning? Do
Do
you
you?
know? Please tell
Please
me,
tell me
since
some
you
more.
know
Tell
so
me.
much. I mean, the snarky
Oh, gosh,
sarcasm
yes.
in
I
the
love it.
is wonderful. And the
Yes.
reality of it is, it's like, oh yeah, let's change the perspective and remember us in comparison to God, and that there's quite possibly things we don't understand. And I started off my sermon that way on this one, talking about how pastors often deal with difficult questions, or why was my child born with Down syndrome? Why was Fred, who has given so much time at the church, killed in a car
Right.
accident?
Yeah.
Right.
Why do all these things happen? And I just looked at the conversation and I said, I don't know.
I don't know.
I
And
don't
God
know.
doesn't always tell us. There's your sermon. Have a great day.
Right. I mean, yes.
Yes.
Like that is. It is obviously Job is a tremendous piece of writing. Like the book
Yes.
of Job
Yes.
is just some truly beautiful ancient literature. But that is basically the answer. Is Job is like, why is it like this, God? And God's answer is, I am God. It's
Yes.
it's like the I am Groot of divine arguments.
Right.
Right. I am God.
I am.
I am.
Right. I
Who
am.
do I tell them sent me? I am.
I am.
But this is just I am God, right?
Yes.
God is God's level of analysis is not your level of analysis.
Yeah.
God is working. This will evolve into things like kind of Kantian philosophy and like that approach to religion that Karl Barth picks up. Like this forms into a really useful like philosophical, theological concept that God is wholly other.
Yeah.
Right? That in the end, that your experience of the universe and God's experience of the universe are not just like kind of different, they are wholly other, right? Humans are smart, beautiful creatures. I love humanity. I don't love all humans, but I love humanity. But like, we are not God.
Right.
And we cannot, this is like a 3,500-year-old take on your experience of the universe and God's experience of the universe are so different. You are just not going to understand it all. And you can take it or leave it. This is the nature of reality.
Now, that being said, there's a lot of deep theological stuff that runs through here too, and the fact of when you take Scripture as a whole, all of it. We're blessed on this side of the cross and all of that, of seeing God's ultimate answers to things, and the reality of the fact is that that's kind of what's going on here. And it's interesting because framing what Job asked was kind of like, where are you in the midst of this?
Right.
Yes.
And what God I found interesting is that humanity is not mentioned in any of the little things that God points out. And he points out that when y'all aren't there, I'm taking care of these animals.
Yes.
I'm creating these semi-mythical beasts, if you take it into a little bit further, in 39 and 40 with the behemoth and the Leviathan. One of my favorite readings is fire-breathing dragons in the Bible. But it's like this is a wild and beautiful world that you get to be a little part of. And what's kind of left, how I planted it was a little left unspoken, because I reached and stole from Matthew, where it talks about consider the birds of the air, and of just this idea of, if I'm handling all of this, am I someone you can put faith in?
Right.
Because that's really what it
Right.
comes down to. And he doesn't give him an answer. And there is one of the things in Scripture is that it is impossible to please God without faith.
Right.
And when we see everything and we know the ins and the outs of everything, it's not really testing our faith. It's when we don't know. What are you going to do when you don't have an answer? What are you going to do when you are struggling? And I shared how we lost a child between Sierra and Madison, and that it was a real struggle, because at the same time there was another individual who was pregnant at the same time, and they were living their life all crazy.
Yeah.
and doing all the things you're told not to do, and their child was born perfectly okay,
Yeah.
and we lost ours. And I just said, that I can philosophize about it and come up. The reality is, I don't know the reason why, and I
Right.
never will.
Right.
Yeah.
But do I still trust that God is on my side? Can I still put my faith in him?
Yeah.
And that's literally what Job is left with, because God doesn't
Yes.
give him an answer.
Right.
I'm God. Can you deal with that?
Right.
Well, and
Oof.
I think, and this is something I know I've talked about before, and I talk about as often as I can, and it comes from the work of folks like Walter Brueggemann, but like, okay, so let's talk about lament, right? Like, Job models something the Psalms model, something Jesus models, and then
Yeah.
something we forget entirely.
Yes.
Right.
Jesus, my
Yes.
God, why have you
Have you
forsaken me?
Right.
Uh-huh.
Job gets mad. Job loses it.
Right.
Cries out like, "Yo, what the hell, man?"
Yeah.
Right? Like, this is an ancient, well-written version of what the hell.
Yeah.
Like, when I've preached on this before, there is a great scene in, I think it's season 3 of The West Wing, where Jeb Bartlett, played by Martin Sheen, he's mad at God, and he is standing in the National Cathedral yelling at God in Latin, because Jeb Bartlett is this Catholic president, and you know, he would have been the second Catholic president, our actual second Catholic president, Joe Biden.
Joe Biden. Yeah.
You know our first Catholic vice president? Joe Biden. Fun facts? These are fun facts. And so, but he, like, and for me, I had never encountered, until I watched it on The West Wing, I had never encountered this mode of interacting with God. And it's just a very visually iconic scene. It's on YouTube somewhere. Look it up. If you want to listen to Martin Sheen yell at God in Latin, it's fun. But it wasn't until seminary that I had someone talk about the lament tradition.
Yeah.
Because in my, very mainline upbringing, no one said anything negative, even at funerals.
Right?
Yeah.
No, it was never like, we were very quick to, and I think this is not just true of, very repressed mainline Christianity, but we're very quick to like, well, God has a plan and I feel great. No, you don't. Your kid just died. Shut up. It's okay. It's
okay to be
that
mad.
You're like mad and that you don't understand it, and you don't need to say that, well, God just needed another angel. That doesn't make any sense.
Oh my gosh, don't
Horrible
tell
theology.
people that.
Horrible
Stop
theology.
telling that. Stop saying that.
Yes.
It's just,
It doesn't
Don't.
placate them, and it's not biblically accurate,
Right.
because that's not
it's
how
awful.
angels come about.
Right.
right. And so, yeah, I don't know what religion that is, but it ain't ours.
Not ours.
Like,
I know. Someone told me one time, and it was really helpful for me during a time of grief and suffering when I was really mad at God. They were like, you know what, Emily? God is big enough to handle your temper tantrum. And I was
God's a big
like,
kid.
Yeah.
fair point.
God's the biggest kid
Fair
out there.
point.
Right. And we watch this time and time again. It's in the book of Psalms.
Right.
It's just, there are Psalms. I think it's Psalm 109 is my favorite, where it's like, get him, get his mama, get his daddy, get
Yes.
his children,
Get his donkey,
land,
The
get his
neighbor's
everybody.
dog.
Name to the third generation.
Yes.
Blot him out. Like, this
Yes.
man is just so mad at some
So
dude
angry.
that armed him.
Yep.
It's just like, get him to the third generation. Like, there are these, like, incredibly, like, we think of the book of Psalms and we go to, like, Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And I love it. And I love this 23rd Psalm, and it's beautiful. But also, there are all these Psalms that are like, I'm so mad at you, God, I don't know what to say. Like, what on earth? And then we see it happen with Job. And by the way, all of these things are in the Bible and seem to be presented as appropriate interactions to have with God.
Yes.
Job is still considered righteous.
Right?
Yes.
And he has this conversation, which is wonderful,
Right.
because we have to get out of this idea that we have to say we're fine. I love that Matthew West song, Truth Be Told.
Right.
And if y'all haven't heard it, go listen to it, because it's literally talking about how when people ask you, you say, "Oh, I'm fine, I'm fine." I've even done that, have people walk past me, "How are you doing?" and then turn around and start following them and answering the question, and they're like, "What are you doing?"
Well,
I'm
right,
answering
yeah.
your question.
Well, this is also like just like a certain kind of, and I suspect it's largely contained to white people, but like it is like there's a certain like white Anglo-Saxon kind of, you know, stiff upper lip and all that we've inherited from our very repressed British and German
lip. Carry on. Carry on.
Keep going, carry on. You're being bombed to death by the Germans, and the most cheering thing you can say is keep calm and carry on? What is wrong with you? We've inherited all of this.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, you know, as the, you know, depressed, you know, tween, you know, someone asked me, how are you doing? And I answered the question of like, you know, I was miserable. And then they literally told me, no, that's not what you're supposed to say. And I'm like, you asked me how I was. Like, you asked me how I was. I am not good. I said, not good. And you told me, no, you're supposed to say you're fine. And I'm like, but that's
but I'm
a
not
lie.
fine. Yes.
And Scripture teaches that we are to worship in spirit and in truth.
Yeah, don't tell me about
And that means it's perfectly okay for us to admit, I'm not fine.
Especially to God. Like this is
especially to God.
We're you know, I'm reliving my Roman study and Bible study, and so it's going to come up a lot. But we've been talking a lot about like salvation by faith, because by the way, Romans does, and getting at this relationship piece. It's about a relationship with God.
Yes.
And so I, you know, a lot of people in that study have all either have been married and lost their spouse or are currently married. And so marriage becomes a useful analogy here. Like if I'm upset at my spouse, I should tell my spouse, I am upset at you.
And not just say fine.
This doesn't wreck the relationship. It actually gives an opportunity for the relationship to heal, because then we can talk about it. And it may just be like, this is the decision I made and you're either going to be okay with it or you're not. And like, and then we can decide what that means, which is essentially how God answers Job. But a relationship is allowed to bend and flex.
Yes.
And have high points and low points, which, as we talk about often, Jesus models for us. Yes. High points and low points of a relationship.
Well, and I think that one of the really healthy things that comes out of this conversation that I included in the piece is after this conversation of God saying, I am God, you are not, Job says, oh, perhaps I spoke of things I did not understand, right? He finds this new humility, this new, you know, we call it fear of the Lord. Right. He's, okay, hang on. Never mind. I got it. You got this, you know, and it becomes a healthy place to be with this relationship with God.
Well, and I suspect that all of us as parents and all of us who have been children, which is everyone, like have those kind of moments with our parents where like we're really sure we understand, we as children feel like we really understood the issue, and then our parents like opened us up like, no, it's like all of these other things. You know, like why are you are mad about this, but like take into account all the things I've got to take into account here. And we've no doubt have had to go through this with our children of like, you know, why can't I X? Well, X, Also, late capitalism is really challenging at the moment, right? Like, and so this is just, you know, this is where the parent analogy is really helpful again.
Yes.
You know, this is like, you know, if we talk about God as father, you know, as like maybe like is the sterner parent or whatever, okay, but like if we're going to take this parent analogy seriously, this is the like, hey, you're a kid. Compared to God, you're a kid. And kids understand this limited scale of analysis, and parents understand this scale of analysis. This will fit my frame. This wider scale of analysis. And that's what we're getting. That's the whole answer. It's just like, yeah, my scale of analysis is really different from yours, dude. Yeah. And you can take that or leave it.
And we don't get the yada yada yada.
Yeah.
Right. So did you ever watch that Seinfeld episode in the, I guess, like late 90s that came out about yada yada yada?
I mean, it's been a while. It's been a minute, but yes, I've seen it at some point.
So yada 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 apparently became more popular then. But it was, you know, this new lady in his life is so my ex-boyfriend came over, yada, yada, yada. Today I'm really sore. And he's like, wait, what was the yada, yada, yada? Like at first she really wanted to know. He really wanted to know the yada, 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 or didn't care about the yada, yada. And then now he wants to really know. We often want to know the yada. The word is Hebrew, right?
Yeah.
To know in this passage is yada. And so God tells Job, yada, yada, yada. You don't get to know the yada, 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 right? Like, we don't get to understand all of the things. This is the mystery of God. God's got the plan. We don't have the whole plan. And we've got to be okay with that.
And, in psychology, there's a thing called moral injury. At its far extreme, it's like when people in wartime are struggling with not knowing why they were told to go do things, and they had to do certain things, and they deal with that survivor's guilt or the guilt of what they had to do and not knowing the reason behind it. And it has a scale, and there's a lot of struggle on how to deal with that and help people through that in psychology, a lot of different approaches. And I think it's kind of interesting because we just mentioned this is one of the oldest sections of scripture. And it looks like, though he didn't get an answer, humbling himself to the fact that he just won't know seems to help him through it.
Right.
Yes.
And just accepting that there are some things you can't know and that's okay.
Right.
Yes.
And I think that is more broadly true than even just here. Of in life, we're not always going to get those answers.
Right.
Yeah.
Even just like, I think of, there was this person in my life that I really thought I was going to marry. And then all of a sudden, essentially, it all fell apart. And for years, I wondered, like, what all happened? What happened? Like, what? I never got that answer. And then, that person very much stopped being in my life. And it became really clear I was never going to know. I was never going to know, like, what was the A to B to C here? Like, I could tell that, like, something's wrong. And I can name in my own soul, particularly after years of reflection, like, ways in which I was not living into who I should be. But I'll never know the full A to B to C of what tanked that relationship so thoroughly. That a person who went from, like, many, many years in my life, like one of the most important people in my life. We were like best friends for years before we started dating, and then we dated, and this was going to be the whole thing. And then essentially in the blink of an eye, it all fell apart. And that person wasn't in my life anymore at all. At all. And this was like coming up on 20 years ago, and it's still like this was something that I pondered for a long time and like try to get those answers, but like when a relationship has gone that sideways, you're not going to get them. And now at this point, I never will.
Yeah.
And so what do you do with that? Like, some of these questions are just unknowable, either because like the person is never going to give you those answers, or in this case, you literally can't comprehend those answers. And so this is one of those things that clearly we've been wrestling with for thousands of years. And part of the like biblical answer to this is, as you said, Scott, like sometimes you are just gonna have to be okay with not knowing.
Yeah.
This is the parent version of because I said so.
Right.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
This is God saying because I said so.
Because I said so. Because again, and like it's not an arbitrary. I mean, maybe it is arbitrary, but it's not ungrounded. It is like because I said so. Because you are playing 2D chess and I'm playing 5D chess.
Yes.
Yeah.
I see a chessboard that you
cannot yet comprehend.
We talked about Mordecai's chessboard, right? Like Mordecai sees something that Esther doesn't. God sees 100,000 things that we don't in every moment. It is the finite and the infinite interacting. It is limited knowledge versus omniscience.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not going to always get there. Or maybe in time, sometimes you get that like joy of hindsight of like, oh, because of this and this, whatever. But sometimes you're just not.
Right.
Things just happen. And we have invented, frankly, unbiblical platitudes.
Yeah.
Yep.
That are often simply inadequate. And it is okay to be mad at God.
Yeah.
Okay. Totally okay. See a lot of really important people in the Bible do it and walk away considered righteous.
Yep.
Including Job, right here. So that's one. And two is, it is okay for us as a fellow believer on the other side of that conversation, whether as pastors, because pastors should know better, but they don't always, or it's just like normal folks, just go, yeah, I don't know, and maybe we won't know, and maybe we keep praying and see what happens.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So last night I went over to a friend's house. They're Messianic Jews, and for those that don't know, we are coming to the end of the Feast of
Yep.
Booths,
Yep.
Sukkot. And so we went over there and hung out in their temporary shelter and had our little fire and food out there and et cetera. And, talked about it. But it was interesting because we went into the conversation as we were telling our kids the different things about it. It's the idea that, God tells us to do things.
Mhm.
And there's always a reason, but we don't always know the reason.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And some of it, like with the different feasts and all that, this side of Jesus, you can see fulfillments, you can see aspects of it. But for those who went through doing that for thousands of years and are still doing so, they just did it because, well, God said so.
Right.
And because that's what obedience to someone who sees the bigger picture sometimes looks like. It's like, this doesn't make sense to me. Why are we building these little shelters and we're supposed to sleep in it for a week and invite guests over and stuff, and then later on you kind of go through what the tabernacle means and all of that and how that prepared them for stuff. But the reality of it is they did it with never having any hindsight, never knowing anything other than, okay, this is just this weird thing we do.
Well, this is a little reductive, but there's a real fake it till you make it aspect to Jewish practice that I absolutely love.
Mm-hmm.
That it is like, we keep these traditions, and sometimes we keep these traditions because we feel deep religion in them. We feel deep passion. We feel something as we break the challah bread, as we sit at the Seder table and ask, why is this night different from every night?
And from every other night.
Close the Seder with next year in Jerusalem. When you sit in booths, whatever. Like sometimes, like you feel something in the tradition. And sometimes the tradition is that way back to God. That you can, in moments of, what do you do in moments of belief? You keep the tradition. What do you do in moments of unbelief? You keep the tradition.
It's a tradition.
Because there's like a muscle memory to this. I watched a documentary, because what else do I do for fun? I watched a documentary about folks who left the Orthodox, the like super ultra Orthodox Jewish community because it was a bad scene for them. And it was all these people who had lost their community, lost their identity because of some of the abuses within that community. And every community has their abuse. This just happened to be one about Orthodox Judaism. There are 1,000 about Christians. We talk about them frequently. Right.
Yes.
But anyway, so these are just people that I think we can all identify with sometimes, for whom the faith had not done right by them. And they are sitting and doing the Seder together. They are doing the Passover Seder together. And as all people who had been deeply harmed by the faith coming together. And what did they do? They kept the tradition.
Right.
And there's a real, like, I think there's an expectation in Christian worship sometimes, and I'm guilty of it, of that you're going to get something out of this, and that's why you do this. And sometimes, like, I don't believe in just, like, empty tradition. We do it because we do it, right? Because we don't think about it this way of, like, this is, in moments of religion, of high religiosity in you, you do this as a celebration of that, and you keep doing this to find your way back. We just say, this is the thing we do because we have to do, because Jesus said the Apostles' Creed, or whatever. The woman who was like, if you take the, I wept when you took the... This woman is apparently Vince McMahon. I wept when you took the Gloria Patri out of worship, a thing that Vince McMahon has never said. We just do tradition because out of a laziness of just like, hey, because we're not going to do anything else. And, this is how it's supposed to be done. And Christianity has very few of those things. But there's a real beauty in a concept of keeping the tradition as a way of leaning in and out of the mystery of God.
Yeah.
Right? When you feel really deeply connected to the mystery of God, you keep the traditions as a way to celebrate that. Yes. When you feel really disconnected, as Job does, right? In the utter mystery and unknowability of God, and just feel kind of a little put upon and real humbled by it all, you keep the traditions because as my seminary professor, my Old Testament professor, Dr. Lamont put it, right? The real sin is walking away from the conversation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
And why Job doesn't sin in this moment, why Jesus isn't sinning in the garden, why all of our other high-level lamenters are not sinning, is because the sin isn't to be mad at God. The sin is to walk away from the conversation. And so the traditions, one of the ways the traditions function in Judaism, is it's just a way to keep that conversation going. That multi-thousand year long, for most of the time that the Jewish people have said the words, next year in Jerusalem, for the vast majority of them, for the vast majority of the time that line's been in the Seder, that's not happening.
Yeah.
Right.
Right? It's not happening. And, maybe they're closer to it now than they were 80 years ago, but, from whatever, like, you want to be realistic about this, like, from the 70s AD until 1948, 6, somewhere there. I'm blanking.
Wasn't even an option.
Late 40s. It was just not a thing that most Jews could experience. And the Seder is only 3,500 years old. And I just named a 2,000 year long time span. Right? Next year in Jerusalem was not happening. And but you keep that tradition, you're just keeping the conversation going.
Well, and I love that you put it in those terms. So for us on, the Protestant Christianity side of things, it is the Apostles' Creed, it is the Lord's Prayer, It is those things. I used to work for a church that had, as part of its programming, a memory care for Alzheimer's. And there, for some of our residents that could not remember their children's name, could not remember their own name, could remember not just to recite the Apostles' Creed, to recite the Lord's Prayer, to sing some of the old hymns that they had been singing since they were children, but then could have beautiful, coherent conversations about the theology of said Apostles' Creed, still well into their onset of their diseases, because sometimes traditions just matter because traditions just matter.
Well, as a way of leaning in and out of the mystery.
Yes.
We need those tools, and we need to understand them as that.
Yes.
Right? That there are going to be days when, these are meaningful and powerful because you're on it. And there will be days where you are doing these practices, whatever your practices are, as a means of finding your way back. Because this relationship is going to have ebbs and flows. And Job's at an ebb. Right? Job's just...
Right.
Job is at an ebb. It is just
an ebb and not a flow.
God love him.
But just as all, we were comparing this to a spouse relationship earlier, even when I'm angry at my husband for some reason or another, or we're on an ebb and not a flow, if I sit down and make his dinner and, do the things that I normally do to care for him, to care for our household, to care for our children, helps us get back to that flow. Right. That is why I continue to do this, is because I'm invested in that relationship, because I care about the continuation of that relationship.
Yeah, when I worked as a stage manager in college, and one of the things you do when you are coming up, when you're an assistant stage manager, kind of a low-level stage tech, is you're responsible for sweeping and mopping the stage at the end of every rehearsal and show. That is just a thing you do. And when I was a stage manager, and now I'm like management, literally management, but like I am now calling the shots. If I had a time when I was just pissed and I was just over it and I was just so tired of the way this theater company was operating, I would sweep the floor, and I would take the job to sweep and mop the theater, so that I could that was like, it's a weird, like, this is a very me way to deal with anything. If I'm mad at the church, I run Ethernet cable, I think. But like, I would sweep and mop. I would go back to this like very basic stagecraft job and remember my love of this thing that we were doing. And I am usually, we just did an episode of How to Restart a Church that is like, what? Like, contemporary worship is so stale. And I'm not here saying, let's do things that are stale. No. This is different from stale, being okay with stale worship.
Definitely.
But this is understanding our practice as people of faith is a practice to help us work through the ebbs and flows of our relationship with God.
To get us in the proper posture before God, that posture of humility and trust.
And to keep the conversation, the conversational lines open.
Yes.
Right? Like, why is it important for families to gather even when they don't all get along? To keep that conversation going. And so we, in our worship practice, like, part of what it does, coming out of our Jewish roots that we have long forgot, that we've long disconnected with, is, we do this because doing this keeps that conversation with God open.
Yes.
That's going to place as any to end. We have all been like talking into microphones a lot today.
All day.
And so we will bring this thing in for a landing. If you have thoughts about your own religious practice and how that keeps you connected to God, email us, thegoodnessofgodpod@gmail.com. This is thegoodnessofgodpod@gmail.com. We are the Divine Provisions Co., and we need your help. Like, comment, subscribe, share, leave us 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts, smash that subscribe button. Help, because all of that helps our work go further and helps this become more sustainable. If you'd like to monetarily support us, Lord knows we need that too. Gear and services do not come cheap. And so if you feel connected to this work and how you want to express that value that you get is financially, go to divineprovisions.co. There is a give button there. We even have a bank account. We're going to have a bank account as of tomorrow. And so we can even now, right now it's just been like accumulating in this online account. We will now have a place to put that money in a bank. It's amazing. But also, if you want to find us, it's at Divine Provisions Co. on most things. Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Divine Provisions Co. TikTok, Divine Provisions C.
For now.
Divine Provisions C. And that our website is divineprovisions.co. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord, and we'll see you next time.